My daughter screamed it like she was trying to erase not just me, but every moment of the life we'd shared. The words, "You are not my mother," sliced through the air like a blade. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply reached for the envelope I had kept for nearly 30 years, thin, yellowed with time, but inside it held a truth powerful enough to upend everything. And as she trembled with rage and confusion, I handed it to her in silence. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the beginning of the end of a lie. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Marilyn Harper. I was born and raised in Livingston, Montana, and I spent the majority of my life working as a school nurse at Livingston Elementary. By the time I turned 35, I had already made peace with the idea that I might never have children of my own. Life had taken turns I hadn't planned for. Marriage that never happened. A miscarriage in my late 20s, and years of trying to fill the space with other people's children. I loved my students, tended to their scraped knees and fevers, calmed their anxieties during fire drills and parentless lunch hours. I gave all the love I had to those kids, even if it was only for 10 minutes at a time. Then, one rainy Thursday in late March, everything changed. It started with a phone call. I was in the nurse's office, sorting through expired bandages and half-used bottles of antiseptic, when my cell buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was another robocall, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was soft but steady. It was from the state's Department of Family Services. They had a child, a baby, just under 9 months old. Her name was Emily. Her mother had relinquished rights and disappeared. No extended family had stepped forward. They were looking for someone who could take her in, someone patient, stable, someone with no interest in temporary arrangements. They remembered me. Years earlier, I had started the process of becoming a foster parent, but withdrew when my mother fell ill and needed full-time care. Apparently, my name had stayed in their system. I didn't say yes right away. That would have been reckless. I asked for the weekend to think it over, but the moment I hung up the phone, I felt something click into place, an opening where something had been shut for too long. That night, I stood in the middle of the guest room, looking around at the dust-covered treadmill and boxes of holiday decorations, and I knew. I spent the weekend cleaning, rearranging furniture, picking up a used crib from a woman in Bozeman who wept as she helped me load it into the back of my car. I didn't ask why she was selling it. Some things are better left unspoken. On Monday, they brought her to me. Emily was small for her age, with wide gray-blue eyes that watched everything and a mess of dark curls that looked as though they had never been brushed. She didn't cry when the caseworker handed her over. She didn't smile either. She just stared at me as if trying to memorize every inch of my face. I held her in my arms and felt something I had never felt before. Not the fleeting affection I had given to hundreds of children in my office. Not the aching, hollow longing I had carried for years. This was something solid, like an anchor dropping in the middle of a storm. She came with a single plastic bag of belongings, a onesie with a rip at the sleeve, 2 empty bottles, a battered stuffed bunny with one eye missing, no photos, no letters, no instructions. I was given papers to sign, dates to remember, check-ins to prepare for, but in that moment, none of it mattered. I sat on the floor of the living room, Emily in my lap, the paperwork beside me, and just breathed. She was so quiet. Not fearful, not timid, just quiet, like someone who had learned early on that the world wasn't going to come for her unless she screamed. And maybe not even then. The weeks that followed were a blur of formula, pediatrician appointments, and long nights with both of us awake at 3 a.m., unsure of each other, learning each other. She didn't like to be rocked. She preferred being held upright, close to the heartbeat. She loved the sound of wind chimes and hated the vacuum. She didn't cry when she fell. She looked around first to see if it was safe to let the pain out. Slowly, she became mine. Not legally, not officially, but in all the ways that mattered. I kept a journal during that first year, something I had never done before. I wrote down the small things. The first time she reached for me, the first time she laughed in her sleep, the way she clung to my shirt when strangers got too close. I wrote down the fears, too. What if I wasn't enough? What if she grew to resent me for not being her real mother? What if one day she asked the questions I didn't know how to answer? I told myself I would always tell her the truth, that I would never lie, never hide, never pretend that the beginning didn't matter. But the years slipped by, and every time the moment felt right, I hesitated. She was too young, then too sensitive, then too angry at the world already. I kept the truth folded in a manila envelope in my dresser drawer. Her original birth certificate, a letter from her birth mother, court documents, and told myself I was waiting for the right time. Emily grew. She began to call me Mom by the time she was 2. She clung to me when we walked into daycare, and she made drawings that said, "I love you," in shaky toddler letters. People would often comment on how different we looked, her olive skin against my pale Irish complexion, her dark eyes against my green. But it never mattered to either of us. We were family, built, not born, chosen. There were hard moments, tantrums and fevers, and the heartbreak of first friendships lost. But there was joy too, so much joy. Teaching her to ride a bike on the sidewalk in front of our house, watching her play Mary in the Christmas pageant, proudly reciting her lines without missing a word. The way she would crawl into bed with me on stormy nights, whispering, "You're safe with me, Mommy." I never corrected her. I never reminded her that I hadn't given birth to her. Because love doesn't keep receipts. It simply shows up over and over, even when you're tired, even when you're scared. And I showed up every single day. I began to notice the distance sometime during Emily's sophomore year of high school. It wasn't a sudden shift, not the kind of thing that happens overnight. It was slower than that, gradual, like the way paint chips off a wall you've stopped paying attention to. One missed dinner turned into 2, a shrug instead of a conversation, eyes that looked past me instead of into mine. She was 16, then 17. Her world expanded, and I watched as she floated further from mine. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers rebel, they push away. It's how they carve out space for themselves. I had read all the parenting books, knew the terminology, the emotional milestones, the language of individuation. I repeated these things like mantras while washing dishes alone at night, her plate untouched in the sink. At first, I chalked it up to the usual suspects: peer pressure, exams, hormones. But there was something different beneath it all, something I couldn't name. It wasn't just rebellion, it was disapproval. She started to treat me like an obligation, as if my presence in her life was something she was forced to carry, like a school bag that had grown too heavy but couldn't be left behind. She spent more time at friends' houses. I'd ask who she was with, and she'd reply with one-word answers. Sometimes she lied about where she'd been, not in big, obvious ways, but in subtle omissions I'd only notice hours later, when the timeline didn't add up, or when I saw the edge of a concert wristband beneath her sleeve. I stopped asking as often. I told myself it was better to give her space than to push and risk losing her completely. She changed her appearance, cut her hair, dyed it, let it grow out again, always with an edge of defiance. Her clothes shifted from colorful and expressive to dark and oversized, a kind of shield. Her music, once soft and melodic, became sharp and loud. She started locking her door. I gave her the privacy she demanded, though it felt like she was walling me out of more than just her room. Sometimes she'd glare at me as if I had done something terribly wrong. Other times, she wouldn't look at me at all. There were moments when the girl I raised resurfaced, quiet glimmers in between the storms, like when she brought me a cup of tea during a snowstorm, or when she texted me late at night to say she'd be home soon. But those moments were fleeting, swallowed quickly by silence or sarcasm or distance. She became obsessed with finding where she belonged. I'd hear her talking on the phone in low, urgent tones. Once, I overheard her say, "I don't even know who I am." The words hit me like ice water. I stood outside her door for a long time, hand raised to knock, but I didn't. I went back downstairs and sat in the dark for nearly an hour. We stopped taking photos together. Our frames around the house froze in time, us at the beach, at school events, her arms around my neck, both of us smiling. I noticed how she began to avoid being in the background of my candid shots, how she would step out of frame or turn away, as if she was already erasing herself from our shared narrative. One day, I found a manila folder in her backpack. Inside was a printed form titled Request for Non-Identifying Information. It was from the state's adoption records office. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the folder like it was a live wire. My hands shook. I didn't cry, not right away. I just stared at it, letting the words blur until they lost their meaning. I put it back exactly as I found it and didn't mention it. I couldn't bring myself to. I was afraid, not of what she would find, but of what it meant, that she was already looking, already questioning. After that, I started noticing how she watched other families, at the grocery store, in restaurants, in movies. She paid attention to mothers and daughters in a way that felt weighted. One evening, as we were watching a film about a girl being reunited with her birth parents, I saw her jaw tighten, her hands ball into fists in her lap. She left the room halfway through. I knew the conversation was coming. I just didn't know when or what shape it would take. At school functions, people still referred to me as her mother. But sometimes I caught her flinch, like the word sat uncomfortably on her skin. One night, I was preparing dinner when she walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again, and said without turning around, "Do you ever think about where I came from?" I froze. My back was to her, a knife in one hand, a half-sliced onion on the cutting board. I said yes, of course I did. She didn't respond. She just walked out of the room. Afterward, I wondered if that was her way of asking, or warning me. The cracks between us weren't just about adolescence anymore. They were about identity, about truth, about the story we had built and the foundation it sat on. I began to dream about the past more often. The day I first held her, the sound of her laugh when she was little, the softness of her voice when she'd whisper, "I love you," just before sleep. Those memories came back to me like echoes from a distant shore, fading further with each day that passed. I felt like I was standing on a bridge that only I could see, calling to someone on the other side who didn't want to hear my voice anymore. I wanted to reach her. I just didn't know how. It had been years since I last touched the envelope, years since I let myself even think about the contents tucked inside. Yet on that heavy afternoon, when the house seemed quieter than usual and the tension with Emily thickened the air, I found myself drawn to the dresser in my bedroom, to the bottom drawer where I had hidden it away beneath old sweaters and faded photographs. My fingers hesitated on the handle, as if they knew that opening the drawer meant opening a door I had sealed long ago. But some part of me understood that the past was no longer something I could outrun. It was already here, sitting in the silence between me and my daughter, looming larger with every unanswered question she didn't yet know how to ask. I pulled open the drawer and carefully lifted the small, worn manila envelope from its place. It was lighter than I remembered, almost insubstantial, as if time itself had thinned it. The paper was soft and slightly yellowed, the ink on the front still legible but faded. My name, written in neat, uncertain cursive. No return address. Just that single connection between me and the woman who had given Emily life. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I turned the envelope over in my hands before slowly opening it. Inside was the letter I had read once, many years ago, on the night I finalized Emily's adoption. A night filled with overwhelming gratitude and a suffocating fear that one day this piece of paper would tear apart everything I had built. I unfolded the letter carefully, as if it might crumble to dust if handled too roughly. The handwriting was small and cramped, a teenager's desperate scrawl. My heart pounded as I began to read. She started with an apology. "Dear whoever you are," it began. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't be what she needs. I'm sorry I can't give her the life she deserves. I love her. I love her so much it hurts, and that's why I have to let her go." I remembered the first time I read those words, the way I cried until my body shook. I had known then, with an unshakable certainty, that Emily's mother hadn't abandoned her out of indifference or selfishness. She had chosen to give her a different kind of chance, a better chance, and I had vowed, right then and there, that I would be worthy of that trust. The letter went on. "Her name is Emily. I gave it to her because it means strength, and she's going to need it. Please tell her that I loved her first. Please tell her she was wanted. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I wasn't enough." There was no explanation of circumstances beyond hints of fear, loneliness, and shame. No mention of the father. No description of family members who might have helped but didn't. Just the raw, aching grief of a girl too young to carry the weight of motherhood. I folded the letter again, more carefully this time, and pressed it against my chest. For a long moment, I sat there, eyes closed, feeling the weight of that girl's heartbreak alongside my own. So much love, so much loss. And Emily, caught between two worlds she had never asked to choose from. I knew then that I couldn't keep this hidden forever. The time was coming, faster than I was ready for, when Emily would demand answers I had long promised myself I would provide. I had to be ready to show her everything, even the parts that hurt. I tucked the letter back into the envelope but didn't put it away. Instead, I placed it in the top drawer of my nightstand, where it would be within reach when the moment arrived. It no longer felt right to keep it buried. That night, lying awake in the darkness, I thought about the promises we make when we love someone. Promises to protect them, to shield them from pain, to be their safe harbor. But sometimes protecting someone meant telling them the truth, even if it shattered the illusions that once kept them afloat. I didn't know how Emily would react when she saw the letter. I didn't know if it would heal the growing divide between us or widen it beyond repair. But I knew this much. She deserved to know her whole story, not just the parts that were easy to tell. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my own reflection. The lines etched deeper around my eyes, the silver streaks threading through my hair, the tiredness I carried like a second skin. I wasn't the same woman who had taken Emily into her arms all those years ago. I was older now, heavier with memories and regrets. But I was also stronger, And when the time came to place that envelope into her hands, I would be ready. Because loving her meant standing firm in the storm, even if it broke my heart. It was a Thursday evening, one of those early spring days when the sky held onto the grayness of winter, and the air carried the sharp bite of cold rain. I had made dinner, the kind of comfort meal I knew Emily used to love: roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, steamed green beans with lemon zest. I wasn't sure if she would eat with me, but I cooked anyway. It was something I did more out of ritual than hope by then. She came in just after 7, slamming the front door a little harder than necessary. Her boots tracked mud across the hallway floor, but I didn't say anything. She dropped her bag on the living room couch and hovered at the edge of the kitchen, eyeing the table with a look that was unreadable. Not quite contempt, not quite appreciation, just distance. I told her dinner was ready, my voice careful, neutral. She said nothing, only pulled out a chair and sat down. We ate in silence. The television was off. No music played. Just the scrape of silverware against ceramic, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the uneven rhythm of our breaths. Halfway through the meal, I asked how her classes were going. It was a simple question, one I'd asked 100 times before. But something about it, maybe the softness in my tone, maybe the way I tried too hard to sound casual, set her off. She dropped her fork with a sharp clatter and leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes blazing. "You don't have to pretend," she said. Her voice was low but full of heat. "You don't have to play this game like everything's normal." I froze. My hands tightened around my napkin. "I'm not playing a game," I said, my voice just above a whisper. She laughed, a short, joyless sound. "You think I don't know?" she said. "You think I haven't figured it out by now?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She stood up so suddenly her chair screeched against the floor. Her fingers curled at her sides. Her shoulders shook, not with fear or sadness, but with fury. The kind of fury that had been building quietly for years, hidden in sighs and silences and sideways glances. "You've been lying to me my whole life," she said. "I'm not your daughter. I never was." I opened my mouth, but no words came. She stepped closer, trembling now, her voice cracking on the edges. "I looked through your drawer. I found the folder. I found the letter." There it was. The moment I had feared for so long. It was no longer a question of if. It had already happened. She had read it. Alone, in secret, with no one to guide her through the heartbreak. "I trusted you," she said. "I told people you were my mother. I believed it, and you let me live that lie." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You're not my mother," she said, louder this time. "You're not even honest." The words sliced through me like broken glass. My breath caught, my vision blurred, but I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't reach for her. Instead, I stood slowly and walked past her into the hallway. My legs felt numb, my chest hollow. I opened the drawer in the side table by the stairs, the one where I had moved the envelope, preparing myself for this day. I took it out and returned to the kitchen. She was still standing there, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Without a word, I extended my hand and held the envelope out to her. She stared at it, her jaw tight, her chin raised in defiance. She didn't move. "This is all of it," I said quietly. "Everything I know, everything I was given." She didn't take it at first, just stared at it like it might burn her. Then, slowly, she reached out and snatched it from my hand. Her fingers closed around it with shaking urgency, and she backed away a step, holding it close to her chest. "You should have told me," she whispered, "years ago." I nodded. I couldn't disagree. I had made that choice. For her, I had told myself. But maybe, in truth, I had made it for me. Out of fear, out of love, out of cowardice. She turned and walked toward the stairs, envelope clutched like a lifeline. Or a weapon. I stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and lemon still lingering in the air. The plates half finished on the table, the chair still pushed back where she'd left it. The outburst had come like a storm, sudden, loud, and now everything was wet and broken and quiet again. But some storms don't pass quickly. Some leave wreckage that takes a long time to sift through. And I had no idea if she would come back to help me pick up the pieces. The silence that followed her outburst lingered like fog in every room of the house. It was a silence I didn't try to break. I didn't text her. I didn't knock on her door. I didn't call after her when she left the next morning before I even woke up. I just let it sit, heavy, necessary. The envelope was gone from my drawer. She had taken it upstairs, and with it, the truth I had held for so many years, tucked away like a secret too sacred to speak aloud. I imagined her sitting on the floor of her room, with the letter opened in her lap, knees pulled to her chest, eyes scanning the lines I had read only once, long ago. I imagined her hands trembling the way mine had. I imagined the rage, the sadness, the confusion, but I didn't imagine her forgiving me, not yet. She stayed out longer than usual the next few days, came home late, left early. We passed each other like strangers in our own home, a nod at the front door, a creak of the stairs overhead. No eye contact, no small talk, no shared meals. I began to notice the signs that she had read the letter, subtle changes, small ripples. Her bedroom door was left open once. Her music, always loud and defiant, was suddenly absent. She stopped wearing her headphones. She moved more quietly. Her face had lost that constant tension, replaced by something more tired, more hollow. On the fourth day, I came home from the grocery store and found her sitting at the kitchen table. The envelope was in front of her, neatly resealed, though I knew it had been opened. She didn't look up as I stepped into the room. Her hands were folded in her lap, her hair tied back loosely, like she hadn't bothered to check it. I set the bags down on the counter and waited. After a long pause, she finally spoke. She asked if I had ever met her birth mother. I told her no. I told her everything I knew was in that letter. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that. Then she asked if I had ever planned to tell her. I said yes, I had, many times. She didn't ask why I hadn't. She didn't need to. She already knew the answer. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, the weight of the years pressing down on my chest. I remembered the early days, how she used to fall asleep in my arms with her fingers wrapped around mine, how I would wake in the night just to check that she was breathing. I remembered the school plays, the birthday parties, the scraped knees, the whispered secrets. I remembered the moments I almost told her, each one vivid, each one missed. Now she knew, and knowing changed everything. The next morning, I found a note on the fridge in her handwriting. It said she was taking the weekend to visit a friend. Just 2 lines, no explanation, no reassurance. But I didn't need it. She needed time. She needed space. So I waited. I walked the quiet halls of the house and ran my fingers along the picture frames. I looked at the photos differently now, not because they meant less, but because they meant more. Every one of them had been taken without her knowing the full truth. And yet, her smiles were real. The joy in her eyes, genuine. Nothing about our life had been a lie, not to me. She came home on Sunday night. Her steps were slower, her shoulders more relaxed. She didn't slam the door or stomp up the stairs. She came into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat down across from me. She didn't say much, just that she had read the letter 3 times, that she had cried, that she had gotten angry, that she had felt both betrayed and grateful in equal measure, and that she didn't know what to do with those feelings yet. I told her she didn't have to. She slid the envelope across the table to me and said she didn't want to keep it, but she didn't want me to hide it either. Put it somewhere we both can find it, she said, in case we ever want to read it again. I took it in my hands and nodded. Then, very carefully, I placed it in the kitchen drawer, the one where we kept keys and batteries and birthday candles, everyday things, real things, shared things. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, I heard her practicing piano upstairs. The notes were soft and searching, not the confident chords she used to play, but not broken either. She was still here, and she was still playing. The house never felt quite empty when Emily was gone, but it shifted in ways I had learned to recognize. The quiet turned from gentle to sharp, and the air felt like it held its breath. When she wasn't home, even the walls seemed to echo a little louder. I told myself she needed space, that this time apart was part of something necessary, healing, redefining, reckoning. But it didn't stop me from waiting. I didn't know exactly where she had gone. She had said a friend, but left no name, no city, no schedule. I didn't press. I simply kept the lights on longer at night, checked my phone more than usual, cooked enough food for 2, just in case. The days passed slowly. I cleaned. I rearranged the living room bookshelves. I repotted the ficus in the hallway. I sorted through old mail, and more than once, I found myself holding old photos of her as a child. Her second-grade portrait with that gap-toothed grin. The photo from the petting zoo when she wore that ridiculous sun hat. The candid shot of us in the kitchen making Christmas cookies. I held them longer than usual, tracing her little face with my thumb, wondering how much she remembered from those years, wondering what memories still felt true to her. Each night, I sat in the same chair near the window, watching the street outside. The porch light buzzed softly above me, a small beacon I didn't turn off. It was a comfort, maybe for her, maybe just for me. On the 3rd night, I stopped expecting a knock. On the 5th, I stopped looking at the clock, but I never stopped hoping. She came home on the 6th night. It was almost midnight when I heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of tires on gravel felt like a song I hadn't heard in a long time. I sat up straight, heart racing. The front door creaked open slowly. I didn't rush to greet her. I didn't say anything. I simply waited. She stepped inside with a kind of hesitation I hadn't seen in her before, like someone returning to a house that might not be hers anymore. She looked different, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Her posture was softer, her eyes tired but focused, her hair pulled back loosely, no longer dyed, no longer styled with rebellion. She set her bag down at the foot of the stairs and walked into the kitchen. I followed quietly, watching her from the doorway. She stood for a moment, looking around like she was trying to decide whether to speak. I poured her a cup of tea without asking and placed it on the table. She sat, and we drank in silence. It was not the silence of distance now, but of peace, not complete, but beginning. After a while, she spoke. She told me where she had gone, a cabin near Flathead Lake, a friend's place, quiet, secluded. She had spent most of her time walking along the shoreline, writing in her journal, reading through the letter again. She had cried, then stopped crying, then cried again. The days passed slowly, but she let them. She said something had shifted. She had always believed the truth would destroy everything, that the moment she knew, the moment she saw it written out, the life we had would crack apart like glass under pressure. But it hadn't. Instead, the truth made things heavier, but also more real. She looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw not the child who had once called me mommy, not the teenager who had accused me of lying, but a young woman, still angry, still grieving, but also searching for her way back. She asked if we could start again, not from the beginning, not pretending, but from here, from this moment forward. I said yes. I didn't say it with flourish or dramatic relief. I just said it, and it filled the room like sunlight. In the days that followed, we moved slowly. We ate breakfast together again. Though we said little, she began spending time in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, occasionally glancing at me while I read or folded laundry. She helped me with groceries. She asked if I needed anything from town, small things, but they meant everything. One evening, I found her standing in the garage, holding the old photo albums we hadn't looked at in years. She asked if we could go through them together. We sat on the living room floor and turned each page, laughing at some, growing quiet at others. She pointed to a picture of herself, age 5, holding a paper crown on her birthday. "I remember this," she said. "I remember feeling wanted." I reached out and held her hand. "You were," I said, "every day." She didn't pull away. I didn't try to fix everything with words. We both understood that healing wouldn't come from apologies or explanations. It would come from presence, from staying, from choosing each other again and again, even after the breaks. She didn't call me mom right away. Sometimes she said my name, sometimes nothing at all. But one morning, as she stepped out the front door to meet a friend, she paused, turned back, and said it, just once, soft but certain. And I stood still long after she left, letting the word echo through me like a prayer finally answered. The change didn't come in one sweeping motion. It came slowly, like light creeping in through the slats of a window blind at dawn. Uncertain, quiet, but undeniable. We began to talk again, not just in words, but in shared presence, in the soft rhythm of a life gently being rewoven. One afternoon, as the trees outside rustled in the first colors of fall, I brought down the box I had kept hidden for so many years. It wasn't the letter this time. She had already read that. This was something else. A shoebox filled with small tokens and documents I had collected through the years. Things I had saved, unsure whether they would ever have a place in our conversations. Things I had kept just in case. She was sitting at the dining room table, sipping tea and highlighting lines in a college course catalog. I placed the box beside her without a word and sat across from her. She looked at it, hesitated, then slowly removed the lid. Inside were ultrasound images, faint and grainy, but labeled with her birth name and date, the original adoption decree, medical records, a hospital bracelet still curled into itself like a sleeping child, and pictures, photos the social worker had passed to me, saying they were all that was left from those early months. There was a photo of her birth mother, young, barely older than Emily was now, sitting on the edge of a park bench, eyes full of something distant and already broken. There was a folded napkin with a doodle in blue pen, a name written over and over again. Emily, Emily, Emily. She lifted the items out slowly, one by one. Her face didn't change much, but I saw her eyes trace every detail like she was trying to read between the lines of things that could no longer speak for themselves. After a long time, she looked up at me. She asked if I had ever tried to find her birth mother. I told her I hadn't, not because I didn't think it mattered, but because I was afraid of what I might find, or not find. I had always feared that the past might try to rewrite the present, and I had worked so hard to protect what we had. Maybe too hard. She didn't speak for a while. She just held the photo of her mother and stared at it in silence. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the call I received that day in March when they asked if I was still interested in fostering. I told her how I cleaned out the spare bedroom, how I cried the night they brought her to me, and cried again the first time she smiled. I told her how terrified I was that I would fail her, how I kept waiting for someone to tell me I wasn't enough, that I wasn't real. She listened, barely blinking, fingers still curled gently around mine. I told her I used to check on her every night as she slept, that I memorized the sounds of her breathing, that I learned to recognize her cries from across the house. I told her I saved every school project, every handprint art, every silly Valentine she made me out of red construction paper. I told her I kept the letter not out of shame, but out of reverence. That I didn't know how to give her that story without making it feel like it made ours less true. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for anything more than what I was giving. She just held on and nodded, like something inside her was being pieced together, not replaced, not erased, but reconciled. When I finished speaking, she told me what it was like reading the letter, how it made her feel like she belonged to two worlds and to none at all, how she hated that it was hidden, but also understood why, how angry she had been, how scared, how free she felt when she realized that loving me and longing to know her beginnings didn't have to cancel each other out. She said something then that I will never forget. I didn't lose a mother when I read that letter. I found another part of myself, but you're the one who stayed. You're the one who raised me, and nothing changes that. That evening, we lit candles on the back porch and sat under the stars with our mugs of tea. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and for the first time in weeks, we laughed, full and without hesitation. We shared stories from her childhood, stories I hadn't told in years, and she asked for more, smiling through the same teeth that had once bitten into apples in the schoolyard, the same hands that had once held mine crossing the street. It didn't fix everything. It wasn't meant to. But in that space between us, something had settled. A truth we now held together. Not a perfect truth, not without its sharp edges or painful memories, but a whole one. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were both finally home. The season changed more quickly than I expected. One day the trees in our neighborhood wore green, and the next they were dressed in fire, burnt orange, gold, and deep crimson. The mornings were colder, and I started pulling out the thicker blankets, layering them on our beds, lighting candles earlier in the day. The house smelled like cinnamon, apples, and something older, like peace trying to make a home again. Emily spent more time downstairs now. She started bringing her books to the kitchen table, asking for help with her college essays or reading her drafts aloud while I cooked. She filled the rooms again with her presence, not always talkative, but there, tangible, grounded. She hummed sometimes, the same old tune she used to hum before bedtime as a child. I caught myself holding my breath just to listen. We weren't back to what we had been. We were something new now, more careful, more honest. But there was a thread running between us again, no longer frayed or knotted, just slowly respun with shared effort. One Sunday, we went to the farmer's market together. It was nothing remarkable, just pumpkins, hot cider, stalls full of knit scarves and carved wooden ornaments. But she walked beside me instead of ahead of me. She pointed things out, offered her opinions, laughed at a vendor's joke. We stayed longer than we planned and came home with bags full of unnecessary things. Lavender soap, a jar of fig jam, a small hand-painted sign that read, "This kitchen runs on love and leftovers." That night we made dinner together. I chopped vegetables while she stirred the soup. We moved easily around each other, like we were learning an old dance we used to know by heart. There was a moment when our hands brushed at the counter, and I felt that spark of recognition, the one that says, yes, we are still here. We are still us. Later, we sat on the couch with bowls in our laps, a movie playing low on the TV. She leaned her head on my shoulder just lightly, and I didn't dare move. My arm was already asleep by the time the credits rolled, but I stayed still as long as she let me. That small weight against me held years of distance and years of devotion, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. One afternoon, we went through the box again, this time together, page by page. She asked questions she hadn't asked before, and I answered without fear. We looked through the photos again, this time with less grief, more understanding. She traced the curve of her birth mother's smile with her finger and said, "I see it now. In the mirror sometimes, but I see you too." That evening, she brought down her old scrapbook from the top shelf of her closet. We hadn't touched it in years. We flipped through the pages, filled with finger paintings, birthday cards, crayon portraits of me with giant glasses and wildly inaccurate hairstyles. She pointed to one drawing, us, holding hands in front of our house, with hearts in the sky, and said, "I was always yours. I just didn't know how to say it." Sometimes she still had hard days. Sometimes she still shut down or left the room suddenly when emotion got too close. But I let her have those moments. I didn't chase. I didn't press. I stayed visible, and she always came back. Our story didn't end with an envelope or a letter or a revelation. It didn't end at all. It evolved. We started new traditions: Sunday pancakes, morning walks, silent reading nights, a monthly visit to the lake she loved as a child. We built new memories without trying to overwrite the old ones. The past wasn't a wound anymore. It was a map, and we were still walking it together. Once, on a quiet drive home from the grocery store, she reached over and turned down the music. She said, "You know, I'm not sure how it all works. What makes someone a real mom? Biology, love, time. But if I had to choose who raised me all over again, I'd still choose you." The rest of the ride passed in silence, the kind that wrapped around my chest like a blanket. We had both changed. We had both hurt, but we had both stayed. We were no longer just a mother and a daughter by name or by law. We were us, wounded, complicated, stitched together by truth and tenderness, and finally, whole.